The two gunmen thought they'd picked an easy target. A Walmart in suburban Ohio at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday night. Minimal staff, older security guard who looked like he'd rather be watching TV than walking the aisles. They figured they'd be in and out with the cash in 5 minutes. What they didn't know was that the old security guard was Frank Morrison, who'd spent 27 years with the FBI, including 15 years on the hostage rescue team. And tonight, Frank was about to show them the difference between a rent-a-cop and a federal agent. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we continue this incredible story of hidden expertise and split-second heroism, tell me in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button and help us honor the quiet heroes working all around us. The Walmart Supercenter on Broad Street in Grove City, Ohio wasn't the kind of place where you expected to find legends. Built in the late 90s, it served the suburban sprawl south of Columbus with everything from groceries to garden supplies, oil changes to eye exams. Like most Walmarts, it operated 24/7, catering to night shift workers, insomniacs, and anyone else who needed toilet paper at 2 a.m. Frank Morrison had been working security there for 3 years, ever since his FBI pension wasn't quite covering his wife's medical bills and the mortgage on their ranch house in Hilliard. At 67, he was older than most of the other employees, but the job was simple enough. Walk the floors, check receipts at the exits, keep an eye on the self-checkout machines where most of the shoplifting happened. The overnight shift suited Frank just fine. Fewer customers meant fewer problems, and he could make his rounds without dealing with the chaos of daytime shopping. Most nights, the biggest excitement was catching teenagers trying to steal energy drinks or telling homeless folks they couldn't sleep in the furniture section. Frank wore the standard-issue security uniform, navy blue shirt with a Walmart security patch, black pants, and comfortable shoes for walking the enormous store. No gun, no handcuffs, no real authority beyond asking people to leave. Corporate policy was clear. Observe and report, don't engage. If there was real trouble, call the Grove City Police and let them handle it. To his coworkers, Frank was just another retiree trying to make ends meet. He was polite but quiet, did his job without complaint, and never talked much about his past. The younger employees assumed he'd probably worked construction or maybe drove a truck before landing at Walmart. Nobody suspected that the man checking receipts by the garden center exit had once been one of the FBI's most elite tactical operators. Tonight started like any other Tuesday. Frank clocked in at 10 p.m., got briefed by the evening security supervisor about a few shoplifters to watch for, and began his first patrol of the night. The store was nearly empty, maybe 20 customers scattered across the enormous sales floor, a handful of third-shift stockers restocking the shelves, and a skeleton crew running the registers. Frank liked the quiet hours. It gave him time to think, to remember what his life had been like before Mary's cancer diagnosis changed everything, before the medical bills started piling up, before he'd had to come out of retirement and take a job that paid $14 an hour to do work that required none of the skills that had once made him one of the most respected agents in the bureau. As he walked past the electronics section, Frank automatically scanned the parking lot through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Old habits died hard, and after nearly 3 decades with the FBI, situational awareness was as natural as breathing. 2 cars in the lot caught his attention. A beat-up sedan with Pennsylvania plates parked far from the store entrance, and a newer pickup truck with tinted windows positioned near the garden center exit. Neither vehicle was particularly suspicious on its own, but their positioning bothered him. Professional criminals often used multiple vehicles for escape routes, and these were positioned to cover both main exits. Frank made a mental note to keep an eye on them during his next pass through the store. At 10:47 p.m., everything changed. The 2 men who walked through Walmart's front entrance looked like any other late-night customers. Both wore hoodies and jeans, moved casually through the store, grabbed a shopping cart like they were there to pick up some groceries. But Frank noticed things that the average person wouldn't. The way they avoided the security cameras near the entrance, how they kept their hands in their pockets, the fact that they split up immediately but maintained visual contact with each other. Frank was near the pharmacy when he spotted them. Something about their body language set off alarm bells that had been finely tuned by 27 years of hunting dangerous people. He began tracking their movement through the store, using the reflective surfaces of display cases and security mirrors to keep them in sight without being obvious about it. The taller of the 2, white male, maybe late 20s, thin build, was moving toward the customer service desk near the front of the store. His partner, shorter, stockier, looked Hispanic, was drifting toward the self-checkout area. Classic pincer movement, designed to control multiple exit points and maximize confusion. Frank had seen this setup before, back when he was with the Bureau's bank robbery task force in Cleveland. Two-man teams were common among armed robbers because they could cover more ground and watch each other's backs. The fact that these guys were positioning themselves near the two main cash-handling areas of the store confirmed his suspicions. He needed to alert management and call the police, but he also needed to be wrong. Maybe these were just two friends who decided to shop separately. Maybe he was seeing threats that didn't exist because his old FBI training made him paranoid about everything. That's when he saw the shorter man check his watch and nod toward his partner. Frank pulled out his radio and keyed the mic. "Management to security, please. Code 1 situation developing." Code 1 meant, "Get to a secure location and call the police," in Walmart's internal communication system. But even as he made the call, Frank knew it would take at least 8 minutes for Grove City PD to respond, and whatever was about to happen would be over long before then. At 10:52 p.m., the taller suspect reached into his hoodie and pulled out a semi-automatic pistol. "Everybody get down," he shouted, pointing the weapon at the customer service clerk. "This is a robbery. Nobody move, nobody gets hurt." The store erupted in chaos. Customers screamed and dove for cover behind displays. The few employees on duty either froze in terror or ran toward the back of the store. Shopping carts were abandoned in the aisles as people scrambled to get away from the gunman near customer service. But Frank Morrison didn't run. He didn't freeze. He didn't dive for cover. Instead, he moved. 27 years of FBI training kicked in like muscle memory. Frank's mind automatically shifted into tactical mode, processing the situation with the kind of cold analysis that had once made him one of the Bureau's most effective operators. Two suspects, both armed. He could see the second gunman had pulled a revolver and was shouting at customers near the self-checkout. Approximately 15 civilians in the immediate area, with unknown numbers throughout the store. Multiple escape routes, multiple variables, limited time. Frank began moving toward the gunman, using the store's layout to his advantage. He knew every aisle, every display, every blind spot from 3 years of walking these floors. More importantly, he knew how to use cover and concealment in ways that most security guards had never been trained for. The taller gunman was focused on the customer service desk, demanding that the terrified clerk open the registers and the cigarette lockup behind the counter. "Move faster," he was shouting. "I want everything from the safe, too." His partner was trying to control the customers near the front of the store, waving his gun and yelling for everyone to get on the ground. But he was nervous, inexperienced. Frank could tell from the way he held the weapon and how his voice cracked when he shouted orders. Amateur hour, Frank thought, as he moved through the clothing section toward the front of the store. These weren't professional criminals. They were probably meth heads looking for quick cash to fund their next high. That made them unpredictable and dangerous in a different way than career criminals, but it also meant they hadn't planned for serious resistance. Frank reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone, quickly dialing 911 as he moved. When the dispatcher answered, he spoke quietly but clearly. "Armed robbery in progress at Walmart, 1250 Broad Street, Grove City. 2 suspects with handguns, approximately 15 hostages. I'm Frank Morrison, off-duty federal agent. Do not send units to the front entrance. Suspects have that covered. Route units to the Garden Center exit for tactical positioning." He hung up before the dispatcher could ask questions. There wasn't time for explanations. Frank positioned himself behind a display of winter coats where he could observe both gunmen without being seen. From his vantage point, he could see that the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The customer service clerk was fumbling with the register, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't hit the right keys. The taller gunman was getting more agitated, pressing the gun against the plexiglass barrier and screaming threats. Meanwhile, his partner was struggling to control the customers. An elderly man near the self-checkout had apparently fallen when he tried to get down, and a middle-aged woman was trying to help him up. The shorter gunman was yelling at them both, waving his revolver in their direction. Frank could see the whole thing going sideways in about 30 seconds. The gunmen were losing control. The customers were panicking. And someone was going to get shot if this wasn't resolved quickly. He had two choices: wait for the police and hope nobody got killed, or intervene using skills he'd spent nearly 3 decades developing. The decision was easier than he'd expected. Frank began moving again, this time with purpose. He used the store's layout like a tactical operations center, approaching the gunmen from their blind spots while using merchandise displays for cover. His movements were fluid, silent, professional. Nothing like the shuffling walk customers had seen him use during his normal security rounds. The taller gunman was still focused on the customer service desk, but Frank could see he was reaching his breaking point. The clerk couldn't get the register to open properly, and the suspect was starting to threaten to shoot her if she didn't move faster. Frank was 15 feet away when he made his move. FBI, drop your weapons. The command came out with the kind of authority that Frank hadn't used in years, but which was instantly recognizable to anyone who'd ever been on the wrong end of a federal arrest. Both gunmen spun toward the sound of his voice, but Frank was already moving. In one fluid motion, he came around the end cap display and closed the distance to the taller gunman. The suspect tried to bring his pistol around, but Frank was inside his arc before he could complete the movement. A sharp strike to the wrist sent the gun flying across the floor as Frank drove the man face first into the customer service counter. The shorter gunman, seeing his partner go down, turned his revolver toward Frank. But he was 20 feet away and shooting in a crowded store with innocent people behind his target. Frank knew the man would hesitate, and that hesitation was all he needed. "Gun!" Frank shouted, alerting the customers to take cover as he moved toward the second suspect. The gunman fired once, high and wide, the shot going into the ceiling tiles. Before he could fire again, Frank was on him. What happened next took less than 30 seconds, but would be replayed on security cameras and analyzed by law enforcement for months afterward. Frank Morrison, 67-year-old Walmart security guard, executed a textbook tactical takedown that most active-duty police officers would have struggled to pull off. He disarmed the second gunman with a move that was part wrestling, part martial arts, and entirely professional.
The revolver went skittering across the linoleum floor as the suspect hit the ground hard. "Stay down," Frank commanded. His knee pressed into the man's back as he secured his hands behind him with zip ties from his security belt. The first gunman, still groggy from being slammed into the counter, started to get up. Frank's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Don't even think about it. You move and I'll put you down harder than I did the first time." The man decided to stay down. Frank quickly secured both suspects, then began checking on the customers. "Everyone okay? Anyone hurt?" His voice had shifted from the tactical command tone to something more reassuring, but the authority was still there.
"Ma'am, are you all right? Sir, let me help you up." The elderly man who'd fallen was shaken but uninjured. The customer service clerk was crying but unhurt. A few customers had minor cuts from diving behind displays, but no one had been seriously injured.
Frank could hear sirens approaching from multiple directions. He pulled out his cell phone and called 911 again.
"This is Frank Morrison. The situation at Walmart is contained. 2 suspects in custody, no serious injuries. I'm the one in the navy blue security uniform. Don't let your officers mistake me for a threat when they come in."
When the first Grove City police officers came through the front entrance 3 minutes later, they found a scene that looked nothing like what they'd expected. Instead of chaos and ongoing violence, they discovered 2 suspects zip-tied on the floor, customers calmly giving statements to a security guard, and no one acting like there was any remaining danger. Officer Jenny Rodriguez was the first on scene, and she immediately noticed something unusual about the way the security guard was handling the situation. "Sir, I'm Officer Rodriguez. Can you give me a quick rundown of what happened?"
Frank looked up from where he was checking the suspect's restraints. 2-man armed robbery team, handguns, entered at 10:52 p.m. They attempted to rob customer service and control the checkout area. Both suspects are secured. Weapons are over there. He pointed to where the pistol and revolver lay on the floor.
"No serious injuries, but you'll want paramedics to check a few people who took falls during the initial chaos."
Officer Rodriguez stared at him. In 5 years of police work, she'd never heard a civilian give such a concise, professional situation report.
"Sir, what's your background? Security training?"
Frank smiled for the first time all evening. "Something like that." By midnight, the Walmart parking lot looked like a law enforcement convention. Grove City PD had responded with 4 patrol cars. The Franklin County Sheriff's Office had sent detectives, and the FBI field office in Columbus had dispatched 2 agents to interview Frank about his civilian intervention in an armed robbery. Detective Mike Sullivan was running the investigation for Grove City, and he was having trouble making sense of what had happened. The security camera footage showed an armed robbery that went from dangerous chaos to complete control in under a minute, executed by a man who was supposedly just a retail security guard. "Mr. Morrison," Detective Sullivan said, reviewing his notes, "I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like what you did in there. That wasn't lucky, that was professional-level tactical response. So I'm going to ask you, one more time, what's your background?" Frank was sitting in the break room, still wearing his Walmart security shirt, drinking coffee from a styrofoam cup. He looked tired, older than his 67 years. Like the adrenaline had worn off and left him feeling every one of his decades. "Detective, I worked for the federal government for 27 years. Mostly administrative stuff, some field work. I retired in 2008 and came here when my wife got sick and we needed the insurance." "Administrative stuff," Detective Sullivan repeated. "Mr. Morrison, I've seen the footage. What you did in there wasn't administrative. That was tactical operations at the highest level." Before Frank could respond, one of the FBI agents approached their table. Special Agent Lisa Chen had been reviewing Frank's personnel file on her laptop, and her expression suggested she'd found something interesting. "Mr. Morrison," Agent Chen said, sitting down across from him, "I just got off the phone with Quantico. They pulled your file." Frank set down his coffee cup. "And?" 27 years with the Bureau, 15 years on the hostage rescue team, lead tactical instructor for 6 years, Medal of Valor for the bank hostage situation in Cleveland in 2003, Commendation for Excellence in Tactical Operations, retired as Senior Special Agent. Detective Sullivan's mouth fell open slightly. "Hostage rescue team? That's like that FBI SWAT on steroids." Agent Chen nodded. "HRT is the Bureau's elite tactical unit. They handle the situations that are too dangerous or complex for regular SWAT teams. Mr. Morrison was one of their senior operators for 15 years. She looked back at Frank. "The question is, why are you working security at Walmart instead of training tactical teams or consulting for law enforcement agencies?" Frank picked up his coffee cup again, staring into it like it might have answers. "Because Walmart offered health insurance and federal consulting work doesn't. My wife has cancer, Detective, stage 4. The treatments that keep her alive cost more than my pension covers." The table went quiet. "I needed a job with benefits, and this was what was available. It's honest work, and it pays the bills." Agent Chen exchanged glances with Detective Sullivan, then pulled out her business card. "Mr. Morrison, I think there might be some opportunities we should discuss. The Bureau has consulting contracts for tactical training, and there are private security firms that would pay very well for someone with your experience." Frank shook his head. "I appreciate that, Agent Chen, but I'm not looking to get back into that world. I just want to finish my shift, go home to my wife, and pretend this never happened." "But sir," Detective Sullivan interjected, "you saved lives tonight, and there are probably other situations where your skills could—" "Could what?" Frank interrupted, his voice sharper than it had been all evening. "Could get me back into the life I spent 27 years trying to retire from. Could put me back in situations where people point guns at me for a living." He stood up, suddenly looking every one of his 67 years. "Gentlemen, I did what needed to be done tonight because people were in danger, but I'm not a federal agent anymore. I'm not a tactical operator. I'm a security guard at Walmart who wants to clock out and go home to his wife." Agent Chen wasn't ready to give up. "Mr. Morrison, with respect, you can't just pretend to be a normal security guard. What happened tonight is going to be on the news. There are going to be questions about how a Walmart employee executed a federal-level tactical response. Then I guess you'll have to figure out how to answer them," Frank said, heading toward the door. "Because I'm going home." But as he reached the exit, Detective Sullivan called after him. "Mr. Morrison, one more question. Those 2 suspects, they were armed, dangerous, and they had hostages. You could have waited for backup. You could have followed Walmart policy and just observed and reported. Why did you intervene?" Frank paused at the door, his hand on the handle. When he turned back, his expression was softer, more tired. "Because that's what you do," he said simply. "When people are in danger and you have the skills to help them, you don't hide behind policy or procedure. You do what's right." Frank Morrison clocked out of his Walmart shift at 6 a.m., just like he had every Wednesday morning for 3 years. He drove his 10-year-old Honda Civic home to the ranch house in Hilliard, where his wife Mary was awake early for her chemotherapy appointment. "How was work?" she asked, like she did every morning. "Quiet night," Frank replied, like he did every morning. But Mary Morrison hadn't been married to an FBI agent for 43 years without learning to read her husband's moods. Something was different about Frank this morning. The way he moved, the way he held his shoulders, the alertness in his eyes. It reminded her of the man who used to come home from dangerous assignments and try to pretend they'd been routine. "Frank," she said gently, "what really happened at work?" Frank made coffee and sat down at their kitchen table, the same table where they'd planned their retirement, discussed Mary's diagnosis, and figured out how to make ends meet on a fixed income. He told her about the robbery, about the gunman, about the 30 seconds when his old training had taken over and turned him back into the federal agent he'd once been. Mary listened without interrupting, watching her husband's face as he described events that he'd clearly been trying to process himself. "Are you okay?" she asked when he finished. Frank thought about it. "I don't know. For 3 years I've been Frank Morrison, Walmart Security. Last night, for about 5 minutes, I was Special Agent Morrison again, and I'm not sure which one feels more real." "Both of them are real," Mary said. "You didn't stop being who you were just because you put on a different uniform." Frank's phone rang before he could respond. Unknown number, but the area code was Washington, D.C. "Mr. Morrison, this is Assistant Director James Parker, FBI. I understand you had an eventful evening," Frank sighed. "Sir, I just want to—" "Mr. Morrison, I'm not calling to drag you back into the Bureau. I'm calling to thank you. What you did last night reminded a lot of people why the FBI exists in the first place. To protect innocent people from those who would harm them. Sir, I appreciate that, but there's something else," Assistant Director Parker continued. "Agent Chen mentioned your situation with your wife's medical expenses. The Bureau has a foundation that provides assistance to retired agents and their families facing hardship. It's not charity, it's recognition that agents who gave their careers to protecting others shouldn't have to choose between their family's health and their financial security." Frank felt Mary's hand squeeze his arm. "What kind of assistance?" he asked. "Full medical coverage for your wife's treatment, plus a consulting retainer that would pay significantly more than your current position. You'd work with our training division, helping prepare the next generation of tactical operators." Frank looked at Mary, who nodded encouragingly. "Sir, I'd need to think about it." "Of course, take your time. But Mr. Morrison, what you did last night wasn't just good police work. It was a reminder that experience, training, and courage don't disappear just because someone retires. The Bureau could use more reminders like that." 3 days later, Frank Morrison walked into the Walmart break room for what he knew would be his last shift. Store manager Jennifer Walsh was waiting for him, with district manager Robert Chen, and someone Frank didn't recognize. A woman in an expensive suit who introduced herself as Corporate Security Director Amanda Rodriguez. "Frank?" Manager Walsh began. "I think you know why we're here." Frank nodded. The robbery had made national news, and Walmart Corporate wasn't happy about an employee taking tactical action that went far beyond company policy. "We appreciate what you did," District Manager Chen said carefully. "No one was hurt, the suspects were apprehended, and the situation was resolved. But company policy is very clear about employee response to armed robbery situations." "I know the policy," Frank said. "Observe and report, don't engage." "Exactly," Director Rodriguez said. "And while we understand that you have unusual qualifications, we can't have security personnel taking tactical action that exposes the company to liability issues." Frank had been expecting this conversation. Walmart couldn't afford to have employees going off script, even when the results were positive. Too many variables, too much legal exposure, too much risk of other employees thinking they should play hero. I understand, Frank said. You want my resignation. We want to offer you a different position, Director Rodriguez said, surprising him. Walmart Corporate Security is looking for someone to develop training protocols for active shooter and armed robbery situations. The position is based in Bentonville, Arkansas, but it pays significantly more than your current role and includes full medical benefits. Frank stared at her. You want to promote me? We want to utilize your expertise properly, she replied. What happened Tuesday night showed us that our current security protocols might need updating. Someone with your background could help us develop better training for all our security personnel. It was a generous offer, Frank had to admit. But before he could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message from Mary. Whatever they're offering, remember that the FBI called back. The consulting position is confirmed, full medical coverage, and $200,000 a year to train tactical teams. Frank looked up at the three Walmart executives. I appreciate the offer, but I'm going to have to pass. I've decided to take a consulting position with the federal government. Manager Walsh looked disappointed, but not surprised. We understand, Frank, and for what it's worth, we're proud of what you did. It just wasn't something we could officially encourage. As Frank cleaned out his locker and turned in his security badge, he thought about the strange turns life could take. 3 years ago, he'd been a retired FBI agent, forced to take a minimum wage job to cover his wife's medical bills. Now, because of one night when his old skills had saved lives, he was going back to the world he'd tried to leave behind. But this time would be different. This time, he'd be teaching instead of doing, sharing knowledge instead of risking his life, helping prepare others for the situations he'd spent decades handling. As he walked out of Walmart for the last time, Frank Morrison realized that maybe Agent Chen had been right. Maybe you couldn't pretend to be someone you weren't, even when circumstances forced you into a different role. Maybe the man who'd spent 27 years protecting people for the FBI and the man who'd spent 3 years walking the aisles at Walmart were the same person after all. 6 months later, FBI Academy instructors were using security camera footage from a Walmart in Grove City, Ohio, as a case study in tactical response and situational awareness. The footage showed a textbook example of how experience, training, and quick thinking could resolve a dangerous situation with minimal risk to civilians. Frank Morrison stood at the front of a classroom full of FBI tactical trainees, watching their faces as they analyzed his response to the armed robbery. Questions? He asked when the footage ended. A young agent in the front row raised his hand. Sir, when you made the decision to engage instead of waiting for backup, how did you calculate the risk versus reward? Frank thought about the question. I didn't calculate anything, he said. I saw people in danger, I had the skills to help them, and I acted. Sometimes the right decision isn't the one you make with your head. It's the one you make with your training and your conscience. Another trainee spoke up. But sir, what if you'd been wrong? What if there had been additional suspects? Or if the situation had gone bad? Then I would have dealt with those consequences, Frank replied. But I couldn't live with the consequences of doing nothing when I had the ability to act. He walked over to the whiteboard and wrote 3 words. Training, experience, judgment. You can teach the first 2, he said, turning back to the class. Training gives you the tools. Experience teaches you when to use them. But judgment, knowing when action is necessary despite the risks, that's something you have to develop on your own. Frank looked around the room at the eager faces of the next generation of FBI agents. Most of them were younger than his grandchildren, full of confidence and energy, and the belief that they could make the world a safer place. Remember this, he said. Being a federal agent isn't just about the cases you work or the arrests you make. It's about being someone that people can count on when everything goes wrong. Whether you're wearing a badge or a security guard uniform, whether you're on duty or retired, whether it's convenient or not, when people need help and you have the skills to provide it, that's when you find out who you really are. As the trainees filed out of the classroom, Frank gathered his materials and prepared for his next session. Teaching was different from operational work, but in its own way, it was just as important. Every agent he trained might someday face a situation where the lessons learned in this classroom could save lives. His phone buzzed with a text from Mary. "How's the first week going?" Frank typed back, "Good. Feels like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." And for the first time in years, that was absolutely true. This story reminds us that heroism doesn't always come in the uniform we expect. Frank Morrison spent 3 years as an ordinary security guard, invisible to customers who saw only his age and his retail uniform. But when crisis struck, decades of elite training and experience emerged to save lives. Across America, there are thousands of Frank Morrisons, veterans, former law enforcement, retired professionals whose current jobs don't reflect their full capabilities. Economic necessity, family obligations, health insurance needs, or simply the desire for a quieter life can lead highly skilled individuals into positions that seem beneath their qualifications. But expertise doesn't disappear just because someone changes careers. Leadership doesn't fade because someone takes a different job. And the instinct to protect others, the drive to use your skills when lives are at stake, that never truly goes away. Frank's story is also about the dignity of all work. For 3 years, he took pride in doing his security job well, even though it required none of his federal training. He treated his Walmart position with professionalism and respect, because all honest work has value and purpose. The robbery didn't make Frank a hero. It revealed the hero he'd always been. His heroism wasn't in the tactical takedown or the professional response. It was in the decision to act when others needed help, regardless of personal risk or company policy. Tonight, as you shop at retail stores across the country, remember that the security guard checking receipts might be a former federal agent. The employee stocking shelves might be a military veteran. The person helping you find what you need might have skills and experience that could save your life in a crisis. Have you ever discovered that someone's current job didn't reflect their true background? Have you met workers whose experience and skills seemed far beyond their position? Do you know veterans or professionals who've taken jobs that don't utilize their full capabilities? Share their stories in the comments. Tell us about the hidden experts in your community, the professionals who've chosen service over status, the people whose current work doesn't define their complete story. Subscribe to The Human Stories, because every workplace has heroes whose backgrounds would surprise you. Every ordinary job might be done by an extraordinary person, and every crisis reveals who people really are when everything is on the line. Remember, never judge people by their job title or their uniform. Judge them by their character, their actions, and what they do when others need help. Because sometimes, the most qualified person in the room is the one nobody expects. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, you never know when the person serving you might be someone who spent their career serving others in ways you can't imagine. The heroes are all around us. We just have to look closely enough to see them.